I think our county, I think our nation tends to whitewash a lot of those terrible things. And so I think one of the burdens of this project is to pretty directly articulate ways in which our past is fraught.
In this episode, we're going to have a conversation with David Swartz. He's a professor of history at Asbury University in Kentucky, and he's the author of books like Moral Minority, The Evangelical Left in an Age of Conservatism, and Facing West, American Evangelicals in an Age of World Christianity. But in this episode, we're going to talk with him about a new project that he's released. It's a narrative podcast, Rebel on Main, and it's excellent. I really encourage you to check it out. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts or at rebelonmain.com, as he explores the issues around a Confederate monument there in the community where he lives in Kentucky, including some of the historical past issues, uncovering some unknown stories, and then also listening to people in the community today as they offer different opinions about what to do with this monument to a Confederate soldier. But before we get to that, I want to remind you that if you haven't done so already, you really should subscribe to Ward and Way's award-winning email newsletter, A Public Witness, where we send deep dives at the intersection of faith and politics straight to your inbox. Learn more, start reading, and subscribe today at publicwitness.wordandway.org. And now, here's my conversation with David Swartz on Rebel on Main.
Well, David, first of all, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Brian. Good to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to talk with you. And I'm really excited to talk with you about Rebel on Main. And I say this because as we were talking before we started recording, I've read some of your books and other writings, but this podcast is a new project for you. But you also partnered with some people. So, I mean, it is well produced, well edited. It's high quality, which I was impressed as I was, starting to listen to it, with just the level of it. So before we talk about the podcast itself, we should talk about the title figure, Rebel on Main. So who is this Rebel on Main?
Yeah, the Rebel on Main is a Confederate statue in Jessamine County, Kentucky, and that's the county where I live. And what drew my attention to it really was just how bizarre it is once you get to know it a little bit. So he wears a Confederate belt buckle and a Union hat. And so in the project, the podcast, I try to figure out how it got that way, right? And it turns out it's a perfect representation of the county's identity in the Civil War. So this is a very divided county that supplied equal number of troops to each side of the war, to the Confederates and the Union. And so it's a divided county in a divided state in a divided country. So perfect representation. But of course, the podcast isn't just about this statue, right? It's about the social world that built it, that constructed it in 1896. And of course, as you know, having listened to it, it's about Jessamine County right now. So a lot of contemporary characters, including a 15-year-old homeschool student who starts a petition to destroy the statue. It includes an interracial group of ministers who want to remove it, if not destroy it. I talk with a neighbor of mine who uses the statue as a wedge issue to try to get Republicans elected in the election year of 2020. And then, of course, our beleaguered county judge executive who's caught in the middle of all of it. And so as I think back on those like hot summer months of 2020, I mean, it was kind of a wild time. There's COVID, there's religion, there's contentious politics. What could possibly go wrong as my county tries to figure out what to do with this thing?
Yeah. Before we get too much into that, I do want to set the background here as well for our listeners. And so tell us a bit about yourself, because you note that this is where you live, but it's not where you're from. So, who are you? How did you end up here? And also your background that made you interested in telling this kind of story.
Yeah, so I'm not actually a Civil War historian. I was trained in graduate school at the University of Notre Dame as a historian of American religion. And then I moved south across the Mason-Dixon line to take a job teaching history at Asbury University. And so this is where I wrote my first book, which was on the evangelical left in the United States. So theologically fairly conservative evangelical Christians who were politically moderate and progressive. And so I was trying to figure out how American evangelicals could go from voting for Jimmy Carter in 1976 to Donald Trump in 2016 and well beyond, right? And then I began to turn my attention during the presidency of Trump to what American evangelicals were doing abroad, more specifically, what they were doing to combat human trafficking in Southeast Asia. But the pandemic really interrupted that project. I mean, I couldn't fly to Cambodia and Thailand anymore to do my research. So I turned my attention in a really kind of local direction and got absolutely fascinated by what felt like ghosts and apparitions of the Civil War that were just all around me. I discovered that right across the road from my kids' middle school were some old slave cabins in almost pristine condition. And then a friend of mine found graves of enslaved people in her backyard, and then started seeing what she thought were objects levitating in her home, being driven by these voiceless people of the past. And then, of course, the Confederate statue. And then another memorial in the southern part of the county called Camp Nelson, which was a Union supply depot and an emancipation center for enslaved people who fled their plantations. And if they could get to the gates of Camp Nelson and enlist in the Union Army, they would be freed. So there are just so many memories and really interpretations of the Civil War in this really concentrated place. And so I set about writing a book about Civil War memory in a single Kentucky county.
Yeah, and I mean, as I hope people are getting a taste of already just from this conversation. I mean, you chase a bunch of, I won't call them rabbits because they're really well developed, but we have a lot of these like historical things that is like, oh, this seems like a little bit of a side story, and then it all comes together. And then you're also you make this narrative more complex, right? So I mean, when people hear that, oh, it's a podcast about a Confederate monument, they might expect you to very quickly come down on this side or that side, or to have like, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys.
Yeah.
And the stories are complex, both the historical side. You mentioned Camp Nelson, the Union camp. It's a much more complex story where our heroes aren't always heroic.
Yeah.
And then also contemporary. You have complex figures on both sides of the statue debate that can't be neatly put into one of our stereotypes today as either a pro-Confederate MAGA type or a Black Lives Matter, tear it down type. I mean, there's a lot more nuance in between. So talk about how you wrestled with all of these different aspects of the story.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this sort of emerges out of how I have ended up like teaching history in the first place, even in the classroom, where I don't try to give a God's eye kind of point of view and narrative of how the past went down, right? And so I approach the podcast kind of like an investigator. And so I build the narrative as the story of my research. And so I invite listeners to accompany me as I go from the microfilm machine in the local library to the county clerk's office. As I read old papers, as I interview historical experts, as I interview contemporary people's, politics and culture. I don't know if you've heard of the Pompidou Center in Paris, France. It's a like cultural and arts center there in the middle of Paris. And what the architects did was to make architecturally visible the systems of the building. And so they don't hide the building's electrical systems and heating and cooling systems and plumbing systems like within walls and in the basement and in the attic. They actually show them in the building as much as they can and even color code it so you can kind of trace things through. And in the same way, what I'm trying to do in the podcast is put the guts on the outside. And so that allows some of the complexities of historical narratives to be like really visible and in your face. And so as I go from archive to archive and person to person, I mean, listeners are hopefully puzzling with me, right? Which facts I want to highlight, which ones I want to emphasize, how I order them, and then even tell contradictory facts, right? Back to back to back, as I try to tell a coherent narrative. And so just to tell the story of me going into the county clerk's office. So a friend of mine is a former paralegal. And so we go into the county clerk's office and she teaches me how to read old slave schedules from 1850 and 1860, old marriage records and deed books. And in them, we find evidence of the rapes of enslaved people, right? But then we also find evidence that the Young family, which is a prominent Jessamine County family whose son gave the dedicatory address of the statue itself, we find evidence that they emancipated one of their slaves. And then as I look through old issues of the Jessamine Journal, find out that Bennett Young, who gave this speech, legally defended a black man in the 1890s as the statue went up for free, pro bono. But then he never challenged the structure of Jim Crow. And so people are complicated, stories are complicated, times and eras are complicated. And so I really try to get at the complexity of history.
Yeah, that comes through really, really well. And the other thing, and you were just talking about, putting the guts on the outside there. I mean, part of that also, and I know this is the podcast format, but doing a narrative podcast, this was, I think, what makes the program so well, is that you're part of the story. And I wanted to ask you about that because as a historian and, as you're doing academic writing, normally you keep yourself out of the story and you had to center yourself more. And it's not just that we hear you and you're narrating, but you also you're very open at times of this is how I think as a scholar, but then the humanity side of me is thinking, am I judging someone, inaccurately? How was that uncomfortable for you? How did you wrestle with that aspect of putting yourself as a character?
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it all stems back to this broader historical point that I think is so important. And that is that history is the act. Well, I want to distinguish between history and the past. Like the past is a series of discrete realities and facts. Things went down in a particular way, right? But history is an interpretive act. And so whenever a fallible human being is trying to construct the past, their own social backgrounds, their own histories, their geographies, their own hopes and anxieties are going to shape the narrative. And so if I'm going to try to make that point in a way that really hits home and resonates, I've got to self-disclose, right? I've got to talk about the fact that I'm from the North and that shapes me.
Yeah. So as you were working through this project, obviously you had some thoughts, some ideas, but what was the biggest surprise for you as you developed Rebel on Main?
Yeah, I think more than other historical projects that I've done in the past, I think I felt the weight of history more this time. And that kind of surprised me. Although looking back, it makes a lot of sense, right? I'm living in a particular place. And of course, I'm going to feel it, right? But it really reminded me of the old line from James Baldwin as he describes what American history is, right? He says, it's more beautiful and terrible than anything that anybody has ever said about American history. It being beautiful and terrible. And I saw that right here. I mean, even as I drive through the county, it's a beautiful place. There are stone fences. It's the rolling hills of the bluegrass. The people are hospitable. They're beautiful people, right? They'll do anything for you. And I talk about that in one of the episodes. On the other hand, it's a terrible place. And I think our county, I think our nation tends to whitewash a lot of those terrible things. And so I think one of the burdens of this project is to pretty directly articulate ways in which our past is fraught. This has been a place of slavery, of Jim Crow, of terrible lynchings. One of the most memorable experiences in the podcast is when I drive up to Frankfort, Kentucky, which is the state capital, and I go visit the Kentucky Historical Society, and they let me hold in my hand with a rubber glove, right? And I hold what's often called the lynching spoon. And this thing just feels so hard and cold in my hand. And I feel it in a way that, I never have before as I type on my computer, right? And it's not just, well, let me tell you what's on the lynching spoon. On the bowl of the spoon, the part that you eat from, is an image of a Black man hanging from a sycamore tree in front of the Jessamine County Courthouse. And it says Nicholasville, Kentucky, 1902, right on there. And it's a depiction of the lynching of a Black sharecropper named Tom Brown. And it's got this decorative beading all around it. It's a genteel object that is utterly terrifying when you juxtapose the image on it with that decorative beading. It reminds me a lot of the souvenir spoon collection that my 96-year-old grandma has. And she's got these spoons that come from Niagara Falls, and this looks a lot like it. And so it just becomes really clear that this spoon is not a lament about what has happened. It's a celebration, and it's an object of social control. The guy who made it, his shop was right across the street from the courthouse. Undoubtedly, he was in the crowd when the lynching happened, right? And so this lynching spoon is used as a method of social control.
The next question I was going to ask you about, and I want to break it up in two different ways as I'm thinking about what you were just talking about, how much more personal this project was for you because you lived there. So, I mean, the podcast has been out for a few weeks, and I was curious about the responses that you've received, but I actually want to break that up. Like, how has the response been with your neighbors? And then maybe are you hearing from other people that don't live there in the county that have been listening to the program?
Yeah, I've heard a lot from both. And I would say the general response by both populations has been roughly the same. It's been a very polarized response, just like the polarization that I described in the last couple of episodes of the podcast series. Lots of people love it. Lots of people hate it. And in fact, if you go onto Apple Podcasts to listen and you look at the ratings and the reviews, but especially at the ratings, I have only 1-star reviews and 5-star reviews. Nothing in the middle, no 2s, 3s, or 4s. So the polarization is pretty bad. Another story. So a couple of weeks ago, I bought an advertisement on Facebook to spread the word about Rebel on Main. I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And the comments are kind of insane. They are mean, they're angry, they're toxic, a little bit on both sides, but especially on the side that wants the statue to remain up, right? So a lot of accusations that I'm trying to erase history. I wrote down one of the comments. This is one that I can say out loud.
You can't repeat all of them.
Well, yeah, but this one doesn't have profanity in it.
Yeah.
But it does reveal some of the kind of depth and intensity of emotion at play here. So one comment goes like this: "Leave the statues alone, you worthless bunch of spineless, backstabbing, anti-American liberals." So this offers a glimpse, right, into the deep polarization in our country right now, and not just on Confederate statues, but on a whole range of other issues, from policing to gender and sexuality to COVID policy. Um, I had hoped that a long form podcast, I mean, it's 7 long episodes, right?
They're each about an hour, right?
Yeah, they are. They're long form. I try to make them nuanced and reasoned and personal, as you've highlighted. I try to practice empathy in them in hopes that this would ratchet down the polarization. But I've got to say that the early returns are not good. Within like 7 days, there were over 500 angry comments, and it kind of left me a little heartbroken at the state of our civil discourse, our uncivil discourse.
And of course, the worst comments probably didn't even listen to the show, but that doesn't
That's probably
necessarily
true.
mean it stings less or it looks. I'm almost tempted to go and give you like a 4-star rating just to give you a different star, but it deserves a 5. I mean,
I'd take
it
it.
is so well done, so I can't actually bring myself to do it. So I guess I'll help keep your streak alive there. So and we should probably remind people like go give a positive, go give a 5-star review to the program after you listen to it. It really does make a difference. It helps people. And
Yeah.
I always tell people like, hey, give Dangerous Dogma, a good review. Give one to Rebel on Main as well. So that way more people will hear the program. So
Absolutely.
So what's next? I mean, are you walking away from this idea completely, or are you toying with, more on this genre? I mean, I know you already kind of alluded to, you have a book coming in the future
Right.
with Southeast Asia and evangelicals and dealing with trying to stop sex trafficking. But what more are you doing any more in this kind of genre?
Yeah, I mean, most immediately, and it kind of depends on what happens next. I could do a bonus episode, right? So if there is a revived movement to bring down the statue, I mean, that could be really interesting. So yeah, if something compelling happens, I'll pull out my H5 Zoom recorder again and start asking questions of all my neighbors. But in the meantime, I'm going to finish the book about Civil War memory here. I've got a full draft of it done that I just dropped in 2020 as I started this project. And then I'm going to finish the book on the American anti-trafficking movement in Southeast Asia that I put on hold. But I tell you what, this podcasting has been a lot of fun. What I like about it is that it's engaging more people, more kinds of people, and they're like engaging with me. They're talking back, which is really rewarding. Right before I got on with you, I checked how many downloads I've gotten, and I'm at about 7,500 downloads, and that's about triple the number of books that I've ever sold.
Yep.
You know how this works. I just
That's
finished
right.
a
I've been there.
terrific book on Christian nationalism in mainline spaces.
Yeah. I hear you. I feel your pain for sure. I also, as you're like, I'm gonna pick up this book and I'm gonna go pick up this book, and I can hear my wife saying to me like, just finished one before you move to the next one. But
Right.
I'm sure because your wife's in the academic circle. We've had her on Dangerous Dogma before as well.
Oh, really?
So,
Oh, wonderful.
yeah. I don't remember the episode number. I'll put it in the show notes at dogma.wordaway.org so people can hear from Lisa as well on her most recent book. I think that was maybe January of last year that we spoke. So
Okay, very good.
So, well, where can people find the show? Obviously, they can find it in iTunes and anywhere else, but you also have a website where it has some show notes and some photos as well.
That's right. Yeah, go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, a dozen other of the platforms where you can listen to podcasts. But you can also stream it from the podcast website, which is www.rebelonmain.com. And I've got transcripts of all of the episodes. Lisa, who's a terrific scholar, is also an amazing photographer. And so she's got pictures of Camp Nelson, of the Black Lives Matter protests, of the Back the Blue protests by the statue in the fall of 2020, and lots of other things. So yeah, go check it out.
Yeah, perfect. Well, David, thanks again for joining us on the program and for all the work you put into Rebel on Main. I hope people will check it out.
Thank you so much, Brian.